Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, we'll start the Shavuot daf Yud Aleph. We are going to begin on the very top line of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. So we were learning at the end of yesterday's daf that when it comes to the carbon tamid, now the tamid, of course, is brought twice a day, once in the morning, tamid shel shachar, tamid shel ben arbayim. But it's brought down in Masechtas Erechin that they always had to have 6 tloyim prepared in the Lishkas HaTaloyim. They always had to have 6. The problem is at the end of the year, we always have to start using, at the beginning of the year, new coins. It has to come from the Lishka Chadasha, has to come from the new collection. So therefore, the Truma Chadasha. And therefore, because of that, it's necessary that the karbanos that are bought for that very first day have to be from this new money. Now, if there were 6, and only 2 are used on the last day, because one's for the morning and the afternoon, is 4 left over. So on this, the Gemara wondered, what do we do with those extra 4? So we had a dispute. Is it possible to be paid to them even b'shas tamimim, while it's still, these animals are unblemished? Because normally, and this is where it's a machlokes, typically we need to wait for the animal to develop a mum before you can be paid it. And this one, they said, well, where did this kedusha, where did it go, right? Lehechen paka. And that was the question. So we said, well, 1 second, we do find the same thing when it comes to the ketairos, when it comes to the spices that are brought to the kaidish on the mizbech hapanimi. So when it comes to the ketairos, so the din is that, again, it cannot be new ketairos. So the same kasha is, what do you do with the Moisar Chatayrus from the year before? So a person is able to take that and use it to pay the maintenance workers of the Beis HaMikdash. Basically what happened was the Gizbar set aside some of the shkalim for their salary. He then redeems some of the Chatayrus with this money, and then it becomes chulin, and therefore it's given over to the workers, and then it's bought back for the next year. So that's what ends up happening. Now, the question you could still ask is, well, 1 second, where this is Kedushas HaGuf. The Ketairos is Kedushas HaGuf status, just like a carbon. So therefore, you could say, well, where did the Kedusha go? Where Heichen Paka? We don't ask that kasha, so maybe it's a raya that just like by Ketairos, it's not an issue. So we ended up saying, no, it's different. The truth is, maybe we're talking about Ketairos is Kedushas Damim. As well, there is another distinction. When it comes to the Ketairos, you can't wait for it to become a Balmum. It's Ketairos. It's not an animal. So maybe you can't make this distinction between carbon and Ketairos. Okay. Anyway, so let's continue. El miyata lo tifsel b'tful yoim. We should also say that when it comes to the Ketairos, as Rashi im nagaba, if let's say a tful yoim, in other words, someone who went to the mikvah and he's waiting for Erev Shemesh for him to become tahor, so at that point he still has a status of tuma. So if he touches the Ketairos, that should passel it as well. Alamatanya nosta b'machteshas, that once it's put into the machteshas, for it to be ground up and everything, nifselos b'tful yoim. Etak is posel b'tful yoim. So where it says v'chiteim akol kedushas damim mivsele b'tful yoim. So maybe it's true. This is kedushas damim, and it does posel b'tful yoim. Because the question is it really? We're talking about is kedushas damim or kedushas haguf? So maybe so we're saying, well, it must be because it's kedushas haguf. You're saying no. Maybe even when it comes to kedushas damim, it can be possible with teful yom. It can be compulsory if someone with teful yom touches it. But tanan, we learn like this: hamanachais, when it comes to a mincha, the minchas yachid of an individual, mawalan behen, a person can get mi'ila b'chai mi'ila mishe hukdeshu once it's sanctified, because once it's sanctified, it's considered to be kedushas damim, and kedushas damim is something where you're shaykh to bichai meila. Kodesh b'kli hochshur lipsul b'tful yoim. once you've already put into the kli, and therefore it takes upon itself this new status. So therefore we say it's no longer a tul yom cannot passel it. Umechusar kippurim velina, as well as when it comes to a mechusar kippurim, if someone who is just waiting on the 8th day to become tahar, and lina, and also the prohibition of leaving it over. Kach b'kli in, that's only once it's already in a kli, that's brought into the azara and was put into the kli sharis. Lo kach b'kli loy. But if it wasn't put into the kli, we don't say all these things. So we see clearly that that this is, when we're dealing with kedushas damim, it could still be possible. It's possible to full yom. So how do we understand this? Elamai kedushas agufi. So now again we're back to our kasha. So the kataris is kedushas aguf. So therefore again it's a raya maybe. So ela miatit so belina. If it's kedushas aguf, it should already be possible lina. Alama tanan hakaimetz v'halavayna. When it comes to the kamitza of the minchas yachid, or the frankincense of the minchas yachid, v'katayris, and this is what we're focused on here, u'minchas kohanim, and the mincha which is completely destroyed, and there's no kamitza there, minchas koyin mashuach, u'minchas nesachim, the mincha of a libation, mu'alan behen, there's a din me'ila mishahukdashu, only from the time once you sanctified it, because it's considered to be kedushas domim. Kach b'kli, once it becomes kedushas aguf, hochshu lifsol b'tvul yoim, mechosik yipurim uvalina. So it says clearly that there is no din lina. So kach b'kli in, that's only once it's kach b'kli. Lo kach b'kli loy. But it was not kaddish b'kli, then it should possible lina. Certainly lina ka'amrit shani kataris hoyel b'sirasa b'chol shana kula. So he said you can't bring raya with regard to kataris. Says Rashi, hoyel b'sirasa ein mishanes mirata. It doesn't change its way it looks. It always looks the same. Hilkach afagav the kedushas hagufi. Even though when we're dealing with kataris, which is kedushas haguf, l'mifsal belina, we're not going to pass a belina. The problem is like belina is like it's leftover night, so therefore because it's long and therefore like a carbon, we don't want that. However, if we're dealing with kataris, it doesn't change its status, and therefore it's not going to be. There's no din of it becoming possibilina. Umihu mishikach b'kli. Once you're mekanish in a kli, the kariv gozer barabanan psulina. Once it's in a kli, then already we do make it psulina. Dilma asilach shuri b'shar hamiskadshin b'kli. Maybe you'll also think the same thing when it comes to other things, which is kedushas aguf. In other words, katayrus mi'ikr hadin should never be possibilina. It's only after it's already been put in a kli that we're geyser. But the truth is we shouldn't have it anyway to be possible the kli. So therefore, you can't bring any proof or kasha when it comes to the katayrus. Normally, so it doesn't change. We call welcome kasha. Still the question, and again, if we're dealing with a situation of kedushas haguf, so then how is it shaykh that you could just automatically do this with the workers and pay the workers? Well, chayra, how does the kedusha leave? So on this, Omer Rabba, which we discussed this a little bit on yesterday's daf, even though it didn't actually say it, Tosis brings it down, but this is where it says beferish, leiv based in mastalan. The Beis Din actually makes a condition on this. Im hutzruchu hutzruchu, v'im lav yuladamehem. They basically make some form of a condition, and they sometimes will allow this to take place. That they'll say, says Rashi, the only time we'll say there's a kedushas haguf is only something that they actually need. And therefore, this is a good answer when it comes to the katayrus, why we're allowed to do it, even if it's kedushas haguf. And also when it comes to the carbonites, the carbon tamid, those 4 extra animals, it's considered to be lay based as mastalan, and that's how we understand it. Okay, so let's slow down for a moment. Let's look at question 12. Mi'masai mechsheres hakatayrus Li'aposel b'tfil yoim v'lina. So when do we say, let's do lina first. Lina is not possible an ad de kach b'klei l'karev. However, before that, it does not possible. As we said, because kataris doesn't change. However, we're just geyser, we're geyser, afterwards up to other things. However, when it comes to being machsher, once it's put into a machteshes, into a mortar, it nifselis b'tfil yoim. Fine. Not a later kli used in the avod. This is the machteshes is not a later kli that's used in the avoda. So this is the machteshes that will possible b'tfil yoim. So that is when it's moksheres hakadosh l'psul b'tfil yoim, which we said. But lina kach b'kli in, lo kach b'kli lo. It's only when it comes to while it's once it's in the kli will it will be possible to full yoim. However, not before that. And again, it's a distinction. It's dafka when it comes to that. Okay, so again, when it comes to lina, it's only once it's in a kli, not before. However, when it comes to a tful yoim, it's regarding the passing it, the kataris by tful yoim is once it's put into the machtashas. Okay. Weiter. So Amalei Abaye, V'hamar hu di'amer hikdish zacher l'damav kadosh kedushas haguf. So you're the one that said that if a person is makdish, let's say an ayil, a ram, for its value, so we say it's kadosh kedushas haguf. It takes upon itself upon the level of kedushas haguf. Says Rashi, ve'enu nimchar mi'ach shakdishu. You can't sell it. Because it's fit to be makriv itself, and anything which is fit to be makriv itself, and medium is beach. They can't leave them as beach. How does this help this time based? Understand? Once you make this statement, it's automatically kodesh. So what do you mean leiv based in? What does that mean? So lo kasha. It's not a problem. So since the animal can't be used as a libation, so the din is it can be sold. Obviously, if you said the l'damei nesachim, so it's not nesachim. So therefore, because of that, you could sell it. However, if you use the language of l'damei oyla, then in that situation, you're right. You wouldn't be able to do so. When it comes to the par and the soya that's brought on Yom Kippur, what happens to Avdu? Let's say they got lost. And because of that, the show must go on. So you're mafresh another par, another seer in its place as we continue to Yud Aleph Amid Beis. The chen seer of Zara. When it comes to the soyer, someone who has to bring, who is over the Zara, Avdu. Let's say you lost the carbon. And you're mafresh others in their stead. Kun Yemusu Div Rabbi Yehuda. So he says that all of them are to die. Says Rashi, Delu domu l'sir haragolim. We can't compare it to the sir regolim. The non behu b'masnisin lu karba b'regel zeh yakri b'regel acher. We said that let's say for whatever reason you're in makriv the sir regolim on Pesach, you could save it for Shavuos. Abel anu in ruyin ad Yom Kippurim l'shana haba. V'kfar avro l'shana v'havi l'hu mitruma yashana. The hilchach yemusu kedin chatish kafar baleha shahol chamosh mois mesina chamish chatos mesas zuachs mehen. So the problem is that from Pesach to Shavuos it's okay. Shavuos to Sukkot. Okay, the question is about from Sukkot to Pesach. All right, but push is just simple reading. If you forgot, let's say again on Shavuos, you couldn't bring the Sira Golem, you could bring it on Sukkot because it's the same year. However, the problem is that when it comes to other things, such as the seer of Parasara of Avodah Zarah, so you can't save it for the following year because it has to come from new monies. So therefore, it has to be killed. So the question is why? Why don't we just apply the rule of lema v'amai lema lay based in mastalehen? So don't kill it. So the answer is avudin ka'amrit shani avudin do shchichi. Now, when does the Beis Din, as we've heard this many times, when do they make Gzera? So they do it when it comes to milsa the shchicha, something which is common, something which could happen. But to lose a par or Yom Kippur, it's possible, but it's unlikely. Therefore, they don't make such a condition. And therefore, if it does happen, so it has to be killed. Okay. Mash'ein Kain, when it comes to something which is more shchiach, like, even though it's not that often, it's once a year, but 100% there will always be these 4 extra talayim. So therefore, a person, it works. So too, when it comes to the Ketairis, this is something apparently could happen, therefore, they're masna. Hari para, how about the paraduma do shchicha? When it comes to the paraduma, the paraduma is not, this case is not very common. And Vatanya par niftis, you can be pointed al koil psul shaba, any psul. Mesa, tifta, if it dies, you can be pointed. Nishchata tifta, if it gets shechted. So Rashi says Mesa, lo nemer halacha the chamish chatois el b'yochid. This din is dafka by carbon yochid, but not by its tzibor. So again, when we're talking about, that was before. So paraduma, Rashi says, it's not shchicha. B'chol yimei Bayis Rishon Beisheni will also El Sheva. Interesting Rashi. There's only 7 of them in the whole history of the first and second Beis Hamikdash. Not sure where Rashi saw that, but that's what it says. So let's say any psul that comes upon, you can redeem it. If you shechted it, says Rashi, chutzlim kaima, in the wrong place, also you can be pointed, right? Matzacheres noimen, you find another parduma, good luck doing that, but you find another one which is nicer, tifti, you can redeem it. Shachto al gabi marachta, let's say you shechted on the maracha, says Rashi, behechsher bahar mishcha, you did about Mount Olives, v'makom habadakla mekeber hatahoim, so you did everything right, ein la pedia oiwamas, then it's already too late, because once you've already done so, it would be genai for it to go to chulin. Okay, but the point is that why, when it comes to a parduma, apparently, why can you constantly be poided, is because you find one nicer than it. It's still a tumim. So because base is masna. What do you mean? I thought you said base is not masna on a double which is not shchiach. And a parduma in itself is so uncommon. The answer is you're right. But shani para the kadshi benekabayasi. It's different because when it comes to paraduma, it's kaddish benakabayas. So it's not talking about kedushas haguf. The whole issue of being paida something while it's still a tomim is dafka when it comes to kedushas haguf, not kedushas damim. So yihachi meiso nishchata tifta. It says if it dies or you shecht in the wrong place, you can redeem it. Habi'inan hamad of haracha. But the animal needs to be standing on its feet. Says Rashi. What does that mean? Shatamoid al ragleha, it needs to be standing on its feet. Vehemid as behemel if neakayin, etc. So that's like a requirement. So hamani Rav Shimon hidi yemer kachim mizbeach you bechlal hamad haracha. Now when it comes to kadshe mizbeach, it's into the category of hamad haracha. Okay, all right. So kadshe benekabayis lo hayu bechlal hamad haracha. So we say that Kadshi B'nekabayis is not in the category of Hamad Maracha. That it has to be standing, everything. So you Rav Shimon, Ema Seifa, Shachto Agami Marachta. If you shafted it in the proper place by the Har Mishcha, Ein Lo Pedia Lomas, that's it. Bosan Rav Shimon Omer, Para Metalma Tumas Oichlin. He holds that the Paradum is Metalma Tumas Oichlin. Says Rashi, Avagav the Isla Rav Shimon Isuri Hana, even though there's a din of Isur Hana, Ein metamin tumas oichlin, something which is also hana, you cannot be metamin tumas oichlin, and he learns that out from various psukim. Fine, but when it and a paraduma is asur bahana, so nonetheless, for some reason, he still says it's metamin tumas oichlin. Hoya b'hoisel shasa kaisher, because at one point it was not a paraduma. It was red, but it was not the actual paraduma. The Yermish Lakish. V'oimer Rish Lakish Omer Hayu Rav Shimon Para Niftis Al Gamim Marachta. He holds the par could be redeemed on the Marachta, not like the Tana before. El Shani Para Hayu B'Dameh Yikarim. So this is actually not because of Benekabayis, since it's so expensive, right? So since it's so expensive, even though it's not shchiach, even though not shchiach, still because it's so expensive, the Beis Din is masna. The Beis Din still makes a condition on the paraduma. Okay. Ayramar Mesa Tifte. So it says that the paraduma dies redeemer. B'chi poided as a kodshim lahachil naklavim. Understand, why would you be poided in order to feed it to dogs? So Omarav Misharshim Mishum Oira, because of its hides. Okay, so it still has other value. V'kaima Beis Din. So v'kaima Beis Din umasta dieted the Oira. So why doesn't the Beis Din also make the condition for its hides? So Rav Kahana Amri Inshi Migamul Oina. People will say its ears are choshev. In other words, it's an important animal. So what exactly does that mean? Amri Inshi. So let's look in Rashi. El lo sukma Rav Shimon hadetani motza nahi manu tifta. The reason why, if you find a nicer one, you can just simply redeem it. Mishum delev Beis Din masle afal gabdol shchicha, as we said. I did the domeha yikarim, so expensive. So maske the taihu asnuye. So they do make a condition on that. Fine. V'chi kaima Beis Din umasnu mishum hatzol porta de me oira. They're going to, just for that small amount of hides, Nebel Rav Shimon lay Beis Din masna she'im lo yakriv beregel zeh yakriv beregel zeh v'lom lishnui shnui dechika kulan boin l'chaper b'chul. So anyway, the kasha is, why would they be amai lema lay Beis Din masna land? Just say this answer is better. So one second, let me go back to where I was before. I didn't get that. Elmer of Kahana, Amri Inshi Megamal Oina, that they'll say it's an important animal. Fine. So he said, what's the din? Can be makriv one to the other. In other words, if you, instead of the Sir Rosh Chodesh, you can bring it as a Sir Regolim. Somulahu, or let's say it was lost before. Omulahu Yakriv, you can be makriv it. Somulahu Hoyel Ve'ein Kaparas and Shaveh. The question we asked is, since, again, one was not like Rameir, but according to the other sheet is that one is, let's say, the Sir Rosh Chodesh is Matahir, is Machaper for one, and the Sir Gom is for another, and for Yom Kippur is something else. So, Heich Zeh Karivin. So how is it possible that you can be Makrim, let's say, the Sa'ir for Rosh Chodesh instead for the Moadim? So, Ormulahen, Kulan boy l'chaper tumas mikdash v'kedoshav, because they all have a general, right? They all have a general connection or similarity. That, fine, one is ein yediyah b'tchila, but yediyah b'sof. One is no yediyah b'tchila, no yediyah b'sof. One is that you're tahar who ate Kodesh, which is Tameh, but they all have the same thing in connection. So therefore, even though they're mechaper for different things, but they're all the general category of being the same. So that's cool. Boy, lechaper tumas mikdash v'kedosha v'mai lemle Beis Din maslam. Say the same answer before. I want you to say that the Beis Din is masna. That's enough reasons. Rav Shimon Leslie Leiv Beis Din maslan. Rav Shimon does not hold of that reason. Therefore, he couldn't come up onto that reasoning. So therefore, he had to say, because they all have this general similarity. As we mentioned, when it comes to the Talmud, which is not needed, those extra 4 animals, with Divi Rav Shimon, according to Rav Shimon, who holds that your Beis Din is not masna, so what do you do with them? Ein niftin tamidim tamimim. They cannot be as a tamim. Why? It must be because so why, right? Rather it has to be a mum. But why? Why couldn't we just say that the Beis Din was masna? You could do it because clearly he doesn't hold of that, right? Right. The fact, right. So we see Rav Shimon doesn't hold of Beis Din masna. We'll just say it that way. Okay. we're going to stop there. Let's see maybe another question. All right, question 13. Al Elu Gimel Devarim Amr B'Gemara the Heter Pediyasin L'Rabbanan Hu Mishum delay based in Masnalayim. Okay, so one of them, and we're going to obviously be not going in the same order. One is Paraduma, right? Even though it's a milsa, which is not shchiach, doesn't matter. Also, the Tamidim Shulchutz Chotzibor, right? So also Tamidin, let's find this. This actually goes back to the previous daf. Niftu Timimim. So that's actually number 13. That's one. And also by the Moisach HaTayrish. Shemachal Noisol Schar HaUmanim as well. So when it comes to Moisach HaTayrish, that is the second one. So again, basically the answers are the Tamim, Carbon Talmid rather, Ketyrus, and the Paraduma. That's question 13. Question 14. Amal Omer B'Gemar Hamashal the Amri Inchi Megalmo Oino. From this, people will say that this is a chashuv, an important animal. The ears are chashuv. So I'll delay based in Masnal Paraduma, because the based in, as we said, even by the Paraduma, even though it's not shliach, they still make a condition. Shemesa, that if it dies, lifdaisa mishum oira. Even though it's an insignificant thing, it's right, which is, although seemingly insignificant, so why would they be masked on that? Alpha P Shemishum Besara in Poidin Es Hakadashim Lahachin Klavim. So it can't be you're doing it for the meat, because we wouldn't be poided for the dogs. So we're being poided the Paraduma for its hides, which is certainly not as expensive, for the sake of letting people realize that this is a chush of an animal. So that's what's telling you that although, I'm just going to write this down over here, although the or is insignificant, based in is masna to show the chashivas of the para. Okay, all right. Well, that's going to be it for that. Let's see, maybe there's another question. TA5. Heich mechalon hakatayris al mois v'chi kedushish behin heichen holcha madui efshar lima mekan or tamidim shiftu tamim. Okay, so one answer is because they're based in masna. Okay, but let's see what he writes. Lay based in masna lehem shimu hutzuchu yikdush l'dam and b'shtani tamidim. Okay, which is what I mentioned before. So this is TA5. TA5, which is basically all of this. So when it comes to that is by the Ketyrus. Okay. So by the Masa Ketyrus, so a person can do this because there's no other option. So maybe it'll work there, but not in other cases. Now it's interesting. It says the Gemara just says on Yud Alpha Malav the distinction is the Kedushas Damimhu. But again, there's another distinction is that again when it comes to a carbon, you maybe just wait until it gets a mum, but you can't do that by the Ketyrus. Okay. Question TB6. Ein mechal na Ketyrus al mois v'chi Kedushav shemol heichen holcha madui yef shalom mikan. What tamidim shiftu tamidim. So let's see what I wrote. This is really the same question. This is TB6. And I added a little bit over here. Lay based in Mastalahem. The Gabi Kataris ein shum dover acher lasois. Avol Gabi habehema kamo moiser tamidin yesh re'iyah grazing. Achemum ulai rak is achri kain yochol liftais v'loy kamo shehu tamim. and this is what I added yesterday. Begam in loim the ketairis va kedushas domim. The tamidim hay kedushas haguf. Adkan.